Let's go across to our guest this evening and ask this question, because the dimension expand even into the Five Eyes. We'll come to that in just a bit. Charlotte Littlewood, research fellow, Henry Jackson Society, is with us. She had thrown light upon some very, very startling findings in the United Kingdom, which made the UK wake up to the fact that this Khalistani threat or this extremist groups could also hurt society and the United Kingdom itself. Terry Melewski, author of The Blood for Blood, 50 Years of Global Khalistan Project, is with us. Ray Locker, author and journalist, with us, and Ambassador Deepak Vora also with us. Namaste, and thank you very much to the lady and the gentleman on the panel. But Charlotte Littlewood, this Khalistan issue is something which has been prevalent in the UK, the US, Canada, New Zealand and Australia. The UK woke up to these realities which existed from the 80s onwards, but sometime mid of 2010, 2020, around 2015, there seemed to be a realization that this is coming back to bite the UK itself. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing an issue in the UK of Sikh radicalisation into Khalistani extremism. I'm in the middle of interviewing those who consider themselves to be radicalised and have now de-radicalised, who talk about being drawn into criminal gangs, even really worrying statements about having involved themselves in stockpiling of weapons, and that's something that was noticed across others in the movement too, even the buying of shotguns. So it's really concerning that it's not being seen in this frame by Canada, and I am concerned it's not being seen in the same frame in the UK. Last year we saw the attack on the Indian High Commission in London, and then we saw the threats against the Sikh family who stood up against Khalistan extremism, who felt like the police really hadn't come to their aid, and government counter-terrorism officials had completely dismissed their needs. So I think there's a lot of questions now to be levelled at the UK and how it handles this threat, and to really get behind the Sikh community who are really at risk here, A, from radicalisation, and B, from being attacked by pro-Khalistani separatists who stand so violently against Sikhs who do not agree with them.
Yeah, there is brazen intimidation, and I'm personally witness to this intimidation when I was in Australia recently, but that's another matter. But Terry Melewski, in Canada, are politicians across the aisle responsible for trying to broad brush or perhaps, cover up for these extremist entities? How is it that people with red corner notices, criminal records, wanted across the world and also highlighted by the Interpol, get Canadian citizenship and entry into Canadian soil? Sukhtul Kunek is also somebody who is wanted by the Canadian authorities, and he was found dead in Winnipeg.
There are indeed some problems that Canada has to answer that have been going on for decades now, and I'm talking more than 40 years, where politicians, for electoral reasons, for vote bank reasons, have looked the other way, and they've comforted themselves with the notion that, well, they're not committing terrorism against us. They may be plotting and scheming and sending money to generate attacks in Punjab, but that's an Indian problem. That's not our problem. That's how the argument works. That's how this gets perpetuated. But there is also a failure to recognize that this is not just about bombs going off, front page terrorist attacks. It's about the insidious infiltration into the community of the extremists that your previous guest was just addressing in the UK. It's about the attempt to, for example, teach children that the bombers back in the day, the Air India bombers of the 1980s, that they were heroes, not terrorists. It's about teaching young people that if they see this parade of martyrs, the parade reenacting the assassination of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi in October of 1984, that's to remind children, that throw a little extra red paint on Mrs. Gandhi's sari in the display, to tell children that, yes, this was a bloody affair and we're proud of it. We'd do it again if we had the chance. This is something that you should grow up and emulate. We're talking about pro-terror propaganda. We're talking about the display of martyr pictures of the Air India bombers, for example. All of this kind of insidious, doesn't count as front page news in Canada. It's normalized in Canada. It doesn't count as terrorist acts, so the Canadians can comfort themselves and say, well, India hasn't shown us that these people are doing anything. They're not doing terrorism. They haven't done anything lately. So why should we return them to India? Besides that,
for the Canadian establishment,
detail.
If this is not an act of terrorism, so is 9/11 also treated the same way? So can they reenact the crashing into the Twin Towers and reenact 9/11?
I do not think they would get away with it. I think you're absolutely right. We apply double standards throughout this affair. It doesn't matter when it's not happening to us. And of course, they felt that many Canadians, felt that 9/11 did happen to us. But even though the vast majority of the victims of the Air India bombing, for example, were Canadian citizens, well, they were Indian Canadians. They were of Indian heritage. They weren't really us. It pains me to say it, but look at the official reports of the Air India inquiry, and you will see that, yeah, that's a painful truth. We didn't feel that those victims were really Canadians.
But you offered them Canadian citizenship. They've made Canada their home. So if you don't really feel that they are Canadians and their lives are dispensable, then don't give them citizenship. Ray Locker?
Yes, I was addressing the Air India victims rather than the people identified by the Indian government as terrorists today. But I mean, look at what's happening. We recently had a scene at the voting for the so-called referendum on Sikh independence.
Yes.
Here in Surrey, in British Columbia, we had I've just been looking at the videotape of Mr. Panoon, Gurpatwant Singh Panoon, the leader of Sikhs for Justice that is organizing the referendum, standing at the side of Ajab Singh Bagri, one of the principal Air India suspects and the first deputy to Talvinder Parmar, standing next to Parmar's mother as they vote and applaud and say Khalistan Zindabad and hail the great martyr Talvinder Parmar, the worst mass murderer in Canadian history. So it's very bizarre. And it's time for Canadians, let's hope that this affair, this confrontation between Trudeau and Modi, wakes Canadians up to what's been going on. Okay, so they're not setting off bombs, but they are burrowing into our society, and there's the rot from within that they are fomenting.